Yeah, pretty soon you gonna be able to get any of those little baby bird. Oh, I'm still in all the classes now. Oh, you need to do that. You're good. You know what I mean? I'm still in all that. But you gotta go. So like, that's all right. I'm a fan of this kind of fighting. Yeah. I had a job that never got back to me. So we went out and said, Greco, I don't even, they never got back. Just but I was thinking, they didn't come to the you know, so you're gonna have a good night, so with other problems. If you try to man. Oh. And because of traffic, we did not say traffic. We ain't gonna got there yet. Traffic.
All right. Everybody ready? Give everybody a few minutes to eat, so I think we'll go ahead and get this started. And as a reminder for those in the room, we are also recording and broadcasting this online to a virtual audience as well. So watch your P's and Q's. And good morning. My name is Mark Campbell. I'm here with our Business Energy Services program, and we're talking about achieving energy efficiency success in 2024. I'd like this to be a fairly interactive back and forth. I am going to get a little bit wonky about how bills work. I think that's valuable as we kind of start a journey of talking about energy management. So we're going to kick right into, that's me and my experience in mechanical engineering, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. Relatively new to the Business Energy Services program for NV Energy, but I've been around the Valley and the Nevada area for quite a while, working for both MGM Resorts and Clark County School District. So I've been a big customer of NV Energy's. I understand how the programs work and kind of how different technologies make sense here in the state. So, you know, my intent today is to go through an agenda that talks a little bit globally and then gets really focused on what's happening in Nevada, what's happening with NV Energy, and how we can make decisions within the energy efficiency world that benefit business, benefits customers, things like that. So we're going to try to keep it focused on contractors and customers. So a little bit of both sides of this. I think the educational piece and the presentation will work that way. But if you have questions, points of order, feel free to reach out to me. Raise your hand, shout at me, whatever it is that you want to do. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just some kind of baseline information about what's going on in the global energy sphere, which doesn't exactly mirror what's happening in Nevada, but it's fairly close because what you're looking at here is world final energy demand by sector, and this is a forecast by the International Energy Agency. And this just came out last year. And the reason I put this chart up there is because, as you could see, there's not every area growing, but one of them is, and it's businesses, and it's buildings, particularly in those businesses. So we will do energy efficiency. We will work to curb that and use technology. And that number in green bar is rising despite the fact that folks are doing a lot of energy efficiency, putting in LED lights, putting in advanced controls on their systems. But the rate of growth in the global economy is so fast in some other countries that, you know, the built environment is growing. So in commercial buildings, and this is, you know, again, global, but also starts to get closer to where we are here in Nevada. Again, we keep building out here. We'll talk about our new construction program as we move through today. But, you know, what's happening is cooling demand's going up, energy demand's going up as people convert to electrically fired equipment, if you will, as they move away from gas. Buildings are using more electricity, but we're hoping to use energy efficient equipment to do that. And so the electricity share of the building's energy mix is going to grow. We usually talk about buildings using 40% of the electricity produced, and we kind of expect that number to continue to grow in the built environment. So last slide on this topic, where are the areas that it's going to grow? And we talked about space heating. We talked about space cooling. You can see that green bar, right? It's going to really grow in space cooling. And that's primarily due to the two factors I already mentioned. We've got a warming climate. I can tell you here, in Nevada, we've seen an increase in the number of 100-degree days by decade, kind of goes up by 10 days every decade. So now we're into the 80+ days a year that we're over 100 degrees. And, a couple of decades ago, that number was 60. So our cooling degree hours, or however you look at that unit, are going up, and we really mirror what's happening there in terms of space cooling. And then you've got appliances and lighting in the blue at the bottom, right? So yeah, absolutely, you can ask a question. So go ahead.
You don't seem to be taking into account the EV charging that's happening in both the commercial business and at home, which is basically sucking a very large amount of electricity.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, I actually don't have a 100% answer as to how that's handled on these charts, but I would suspect that is not necessarily included here as we're looking at buildings, particularly, and transportation is not here. But you're right. As an overall fuel source. Oh, sorry. For those online, the question was, oh no, I got it because they can hear me. I'm mic'd up for the folks online. So for the to repeat that question and answer, the question was, is transportation and the use of electricity to charge vehicles kind of demonstrated in a graph like this that's showing the growth of building energy use and energy use across that. And so this particular graph, I do not think is actually capturing that. If I was to go back and look at transport, right, it's in there. The interesting thing about transport is you also don't see it going up. And that's because electric vehicles are more efficient than our fossil fuel friends. So as much as people are driving a little bit more, we're just talking about exajoules of energy here. We're not talking about the fuel sort of source, right? So great question. And although I don't have really much in this presentation to speak about how we're managing electricity use from electric vehicles on buildings, building design, 100% has to be taken into account. I think we had a presentation from Nevada Professional Facility Managers Association in January where they highlighted on this topic, and there's actually some requirements in code coming in Clark County as to the necessary number of parking spots that have to be built for a new development to provide electric charging. And so right then and there, your design's already incorporating that many spots and needs to be future-proofed. So great question. So kind of weaving in some information that is broad to energy efficiency and things that we've talked about in this type of training before. High level, why to do energy efficiency? Why are we here? Why are we incentivizing this? And there's many reasons. From a business standpoint, from an operational standpoint, we're trying to reduce operating costs. We're trying to be more efficient with our dollars, use our dollars for other things, like we were just talking about. We have goals as a business, as a society, as individual humans to reduce carbon footprint in some cases. Some cases it's a requirement to do that because policies are driving that decision. Again, customers make choices based on this in some cases, especially when it comes to things like electric vehicles, where there's some passion for that, to be somebody who's net zero or reducing their environmental footprint. Again, working in large business, there are large corporate customers who want to be on that side. They want to be able to say that they had a zero waste or a zero energy use event or a zero energy use building, because it drives business for them as well. And then employees feel the same way. So there's a certain subset of employees that want to look and see that companies are doing this to reduce their impact to the environment. There's business opportunity here, right? Because there's a lot of people hungry to do it. States have gone to various levels of incentivizing these, and obviously we'll talk about what we have available for that here. And so, oops, sorry, I think I might have skipped ahead too far. So let's talk about our program and what happened in 2023 with Business Energy Services, to give you some perspective on what that opportunity is in Nevada, in the Las Vegas market, the Reno market, and what's happening. So in 2023, we did over 600 projects. And we provided almost $7 million in incentives across those projects. So, we can go as far down as an incentive as $250 for small projects, and we can go up to an incentive that's over, 300,000. In some cases, last year we had a couple in that category. So, we had almost 155 million kilowatt hours in energy savings. That'll be perpetually, impactful to the grid here. And so that's good for all of us in an area that's still experiencing growth, and we'll constantly need to keep importing energy, right? So when I talk about project counts, how many projects did we do? These are the highest areas that we saw participation. We talk about lighting. We had 77 custom projects. That means they didn't fall in our prescriptive category of a light that's exterior that runs, 12 hours a day. It was something more creative. The controls were more aggressive. The use was maybe 24/7, and we were able to incentivize those projects and do a little math to find a way to give them the maximum benefit and dial in their energy savings as well. A lot of exterior lighting projects. So I don't see that slowing down this year. I've already had many conversations. I think we're everything from street lights, parking lots, wall packs, you're seeing as many folks do it as they can. And we'll talk about how, that's being bundled into other work, right? Road construction everywhere. And I have been happy to see in some cases that they piggyback on that road construction to replace the lights while they're there, right? It's kind of nice. So, yes, sir. So how do customers come into these projects? Kind of the question. Many different ways. So I'll talk about our program a little bit later but they come from every angle you could think of, right? So the I guess I would have to say that, the answer is very broad. So how do customers get into the program? We have sessions like this. We provide a lot of outreach. We meet with large customers. We meet with contractors. We have a contractor network. So, customers that are looking to save energy, we reach out to them, but a lot of our program is contractor driven, okay? So contractors are out there meeting with customers, and they're building into their muscle memory how to design their proposal and account for, hey, this project's going to save you 1,000 kilowatt hours. I'm just making up the numbers, right? And we think that's going to save you this many dollars in electricity costs, and you're also going to save here in maintenance. But on top of that, we have our energy efficiency incentives from NV Energy. So, yeah, I mean, most of our projects, I would say, come in because a contractor sold a project, right? And that happens on retrofit projects. It happens on new construction as well. Did that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, we do have a subset of customers, and I'll talk about that later, who do these projects in-house. They purchase the equipment and they use their own staff to put it in. Those are incentivized as well. So, we have large interior projects in particular that, certain customers prefer to do it that way. So, let's talk about our largest energy savings projects. So as you could see, we had certain categories where just a few projects accounted for millions of kilowatt hours. So if you were at our kickoff, you've heard us talk about retro commissioning. I won't say that word too many times today. But we are going to keep talking about retro commissioning because that program is built for us to be very successful. That's a low cost opportunity to go in and really take a look at how your operation is running, put in some controls, put in a small amount of hardware, and then run your facility in a more efficient way. We had just 6 projects save 11 million kilowatt hours there. Interior lighting, we're still seeing opportunities in the back of the house, particularly areas that we would have just kind of ignored, right? We were just speaking about elevators, right? There's little areas that we just kind of haven't gotten there yet. Little closets with T12s in them in some places, right? Cove lights is another one, right? It's kind of a slam dunk, but you don't really think about it until you think about it, and then wow, I should be doing all my coves as fast as I possibly can. So we had large interior lighting projects, just 5 accounting for almost 10 million kilowatt hours. So other successful areas, new construction. This is an area of opportunity. We just talked about our new construction program can cover built up new construction, can cover major renovations. And major renovations are, build out a shell, right, for a tenant. Whatever you're putting in there, if you're making good choices, we can incentivize that. So we did about 111 projects across the state in new construction. Who thinks that was the total amount of construction that happened in Nevada, right? So there's a huge opportunity in new construction to capture projects that are saving energy. And I'll talk a little bit about how that new construction program works, but effectively we're trying to beat the energy code of the jurisdiction, which right now is IECC 2018. HVAC unit replacements, over 250 of those were replaced. And so we're incentivizing good choices on HVAC units. You're getting a better, efficient, a more efficient unit with a higher SEER rating. The higher the tonnage, the more incentive that you can get for that project. We had demand control ventilation. So, and this is a topic I don't want to bloviate on because I really could. Everybody got, focused on indoor air quality in the last few years, right? If you're a facility operator, people were banging on your door about what you're doing with outside air, what are you doing with filters, how are you ventilating the space? And so demand control ventilation, for those of you that don't know, is a way to make sure that your environment is healthy, but you're not blowing in so much outside air that you're having to heat and cool it and use excessive amounts of energy to do that. So you would get control feedback from a series of sensors, for example, CO2 or particulate matter, that would allow you to say, my space is doing really well. I don't need to ventilate at the rate that I've been, so I can bring down my outside air intake and be more efficient with that HVAC. So cooler doors and lights, this is primary for grocery stores, but to say that there's a lot of opportunity with refrigeration in those systems as well. So we saw a lot of grocery stores. If you've been around, I can almost guarantee you your local store has done this. There used to be no doors. Remember, you used to walk up and grab it, right? Now everybody's putting doors in and lights that go with it, and in some cases, motion controlled lights that go dark until you show up. I'm always grocery shopping with my kids at like 6:30 in the morning because they want something for breakfast, and all the lights are off in those coolers, and I'm up there and the lights turn on. So we're getting sophisticated in areas that I don't think people would have thought, and that's pretty neat to see. ROI and financial benefits. Again, I mentioned retro commissioning. With retro commissioning, we incentivize those projects up to 100% of that cost. And that is because they're typically overall lower cost programs that deliver a lot of kilowatt hours. So if the savings justify that incentive, we can pay for almost all or most of that project. Lighting, as I mentioned, and to follow up on some of the questions, we had projects with high ROI in both in-house installation and as contractor-driven installations as well. And so we had about 50 projects in 2023 that were less than a 1-year payback. So, and that encompassed everything that you see here in terms of these technologies. And so that's pretty impressive. We had about 250 projects that were below a 4-year payback. And so you've got a lot of opportunity out there for those customers. And that includes the energy savings, right? That first year savings and plus the incentive into it. So I wanted to highlight a project that actually doesn't fall into the categories that I laid out in terms of ROI. It's a little bit longer, but it's something that I think is needs to be stated about our program that's really important because we're seeing more manufacturing move into the state. And we can really, we can incentivize manufacturing operations that get more efficient as well. And so I'm putting here an example. If you were at our kickoff event last month, you would have seen this. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back. So this was a injection molding facility. So they make plastic pieces and parts. And they were replacing their major equipment. It aged out. And that's a theme I'm going to talk about as we get here, right? They've got to replace this thing, right? But they took that opportunity to get a newer, more efficient unit. And so even though they consumed a little more electricity, they produced a lot more stuff per unit of electricity. And so those are the type of project we can also incentivize. And so as you're thinking about, as a customer, replacing equipment, know that in the back of your mind, I might actually be eligible for incentive because I'm being more efficient in my operation. So this follows our 1, 2, 3 process. So it allows me to highlight, that we receive an application for a customer. They say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. To your question about where does this come from, right? They're going to come to us and say, yeah, we think we're going to save X amount of electricity per unit or overall or however that comes. And that estimation may come from the customer because they know their operation and they know their bills, and it may come from the contractor because they know the system and they know how it works. It might come from an engineer and designer. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we go through that pre-application. In some cases, we might do a pre-inspection. Here we did that. We said, yeah, this is going to be great. We need a little more detail. This is a custom project. So we're going to take some measurements, get some pre-data, get some production data. They execute the project. When the project's completed, we look at the final documentation, we make sure, and then we go back and see what it is that they did. We look at those data loggers at the end. Again, this being a custom project, we're looking at energy consumption of the equipment and the production from the line. So as you can see, this project saved over 1 million kilowatt hours and received an incentive of over $100,000. So a payback period of 5.4 years. Now, if you're a manufacturer, that's all day long, right? Your idea is you're not going anywhere. It's not all, there's certain customers that wouldn't look at that project. They want it under 2 years, and that's certain classifications of customer. I've been with some of those companies in the past. But here, when you think about that use case and you come with 5.4 years payback, and that's simple payback. That's not including any of their other benefits, right? I'm not factoring in the fact that they don't have to work on that unit as much as they had to before. So I'm going to move on to, so now I'm going to move to thinking a little bit more about the industry and energy management in general. And so, we have education and training events throughout the year. And so this being the first one of 2024, sorry, I'm really going to focus on kind of number one here. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I could walk you through this whole thing probably with my eyes closed. But I really want to talk about evaluate energy usage and annual cost, because whether you're a customer or whether you're a contractor or working with a customer, you really need to understand what it is that you're trying to, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the energy? Where's the consumption? And so the thing I'm going to focus on now is your bill. So who's familiar with their NV Energy bill at their home or their business? Whose CFO is familiar with your energy bill at your home or your business? Okay, your CFO might be your significant other at your home. It might be your legitimate finance or accounting person. So NV Energy has a great, and I produced this picture here and the link here for how to actually understand your bill as a commercial customer. But I'm going to do that for you here in a little bit. I'm not going to go through all 15 of these lines. I'm happy to answer questions. There's a few of them that are going to make or break your project. So that's what I really want to focus on here when you're looking at your bill. When you're looking at your bill, first thing that you need to understand is what is the rate that you're operating underneath as a customer. That makes a big difference on the time of day and how you use your energy. It makes a big difference on your overall cost and what type of choices you might want to make. So here you can see on their website, again, I provided the link about how to get to the rate schedules. This takes a little time and effort, right? So again, if you're a contractor dealing with a customer who's not deep into their energy bills, you need to get familiar with this, right? This is part of your pitch to say, look, right here, this is the line I'm going to cut down for you. And you're not going to figure that out unless you understand the rate schedules and where their meter's at. So I've got an example here. I got a couple of examples of different rates in Southern Nevada. So first, we're going to look at what's called an LGS1 rate. This is a commercial customer, not a huge commercial customer. This is a customer that's using, at any given time, less than 300 kilowatts, right? So when we look at the way that those rates are applied, it's based on your demand. So as you can see, the bill shows you a bar chart. The bar charts are something that takes a little getting used to because the scales change dramatically depending on how much energy you use. So if you look at our little, let's see if I got my pointer here. Yeah, little pointer here. So this scale will be different on every bill that you look at. And so you got to orient your eyes around it and understand that. But as you would expect in Southern Nevada, we've got a spike in our electricity use in the summer months. But as I look at this bill, I'm going to spend some time talking about that. And so bear with me. If you have questions, let me know. If I'm looking at this bill, what am I looking at, right? Where am I paying attention? Am I concerned about anything? Obviously, I see we've got an energy use spike in the summer. That's to be expected from HVAC. I'm actually surprised the spike's not bigger. That means I'm using electricity at a baseline level in a pretty significant way at this facility. So I'd be looking at what's happening all year round. So I'd be thinking more about lighting. I'd be thinking more about things that are running with motors, things that are part of a process, and perhaps even heating, right? Because maybe I have some electrical heating or some things like that. And then if we look at the numbers down here, and I know this is probably a little bit hard to see, but you can see all the breakdowns of charges. There's a few things to highlight. Your top row, electric consumption, that's the bulk of your bill. What's the cost per kilowatt hour that I used? In this particular case, it's 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And customer, that's a flat rate. Okay, that number is only going to change when NV Energy works with the Public Utility Commission, and that rate gets changed based on any number of factors. Demand charge, that's a cost per kilowatt. So how much electricity, how much power did I pull at any 15-minute period in the last 30 days? Everybody understand demand charge, or am I being redundant, or is this helpful? So that number is set based on 15 minutes from your prior 30 days. Whatever you did for 15 minutes, you're paying for the month's bill. That'll play into this conversation as we go to some of these other rates, okay? And there's a series of other charges here. As you can see in the order of magnitude, electric consumption is $7,000+ and everything else is sub $1,000. So in this particular customer, I'm really focusing on what's causing me to use all these kilowatt hours in every month of the year. Now let's look at this customer in the summer. So now we've experienced a few more months and we are able to compare a couple of different things. I noticed a few things right away. I'm actually not getting crazy different from what we used the previous year. So if I look at the blue versus the gray, my operations are pretty similar. I feel good about that in the sense that I'm not spiking. But I also didn't do a whole heck of a lot to reduce my electricity. And that's important because as you look at the kilowatt hour rate, we're about 6 months later. NV Energy obviously needed to recoup some expenses, went to the Public Utility Commission. Now that rate is 11.7 cents a kilowatt hour. And your demand charge actually went down to $4 per kilowatt. So now you've got a couple line items going over $1,000. In this case, they've actually got a credit. So this can happen on your bill as well. CR, which is credit. And again, there's kind of a give and take as NV Energy worked with the Public Utility Commission, certain things where they collect too much revenue in a quarter comes back on the next bill. You'll see that on your bill. It's usually never all that impactful. I see a question. That is, so there's a few things here. Actually, I'm glad because this gives me an opportunity to talk about a few of these. That one, in fact, you know what? If you give me a moment, I will talk about the temp green financing. I'm going to bring it up here and read it because if I just tell you, it will be too much of a layman's terms. But while I'm doing that, there's another line item on here that I definitely want you to draw your attention to. And it is called energy efficiency charge. Why do I want to talk about that one? Because that's the charge that pays for these energy efficiency programs. Everybody's paying that charge, residents and commercial customers, residential and commercial. It's not a ton of money. It's $141 on this bill, but it's on every bill. And so as a commercial customer, they should be taking advantage of our programs to get incentive because they're paying into it, right? This is something that we talk about with these customers. Obviously, the bigger the customer, the more money they're putting into the program. And I would encourage you as a residential customer of NV Energy to look at their programs as well because you're paying into it as well. So whether it be appliances, thermostats, things like that. So let me answer your question about, because I don't want to get too far away from that question. And this is on the link that is on the slides as well, but I specifically saved this file so I can answer questions like that. So temporary green power financing, it's abbreviated to be TRED. So if you're looking at the rate schedule, you'll see it probably written as TRED, T-R-E-D. Was established by the Nevada legislature in 2005 to assure payment for the cost of renewable energy to developers who had contracts to sell electricity to NV Energy and needed financing to get the projects built. Does that make sense? I'm bearing that down to say that at that time, NV Energy needed to procure renewable energy to meet their renewable portfolio standards. They needed to produce a certain percentage of their electricity from renewables. And to do that, the projects needed to be built and the projects needed to be financed. And so NV Energy took on a small charge, which still exists to help finance those projects. Does that make sense? They financed, they provided financing to renewable energy projects that they had to have, if that makes sense. So that was driven by the State Public Utility Commission. Yeah. Yes. Yes, and if I'm not mistaken, I do think it does exist on residential bills as well. I'm not 100%, but I do think it's there. So, any other questions? Okay, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover on this slide. I will also highlight that there's also a facility charge, and this is on every month. That's a per kilowatt number as well. I've got a couple charges that are based on demand. Now I'm going to talk about an LGS2 customer. So this is a bigger customer. They're using at least 300 kW up to 1,000 kW. And as you can see, this bill gets a little more complicated in the winter. We got a few more charges. We got a different load profile. We got a lot bigger spike here in the summer than we do in the previous customer. In this case, I'm kind of going in the reverse the way these bills worked out. So here you've got really full 2 years to compare. What am I looking at as an energy manager, a CFO maybe, facility person who understands the bill? I got a pretty decent spike there in the year 2 in the winter. Something related to the holidays, something related to I added electric heating. Any number of things could have happened at this customer, but that's catching my eye right away. Would catch anybody's eye. What's also catching my eye is I used a lot less in the summer than I did previously. So likely I did something on my HVAC units. Maybe I replaced a couple of bad units. Maybe I added some controls on a unit. Maybe I updated my schedules. If I look at the charge details, you can see that we've got, in this case, the bill's a little bit longer because You will notice on some bills that they change their rates mid-cycle of a bill cycle. So for a period of time, the rate was 10.3 cents, and for a period of time, the rate was 10.2 cents per kilowatt hour just for consumption. And as you can see, that applies to all these different charges. Interesting things about the larger meters. There's a time of use aspect to these meters that we'll talk about in the summer in terms of energy costs more. But there's a flip to the script in off-peak months. So our months in the winter, which are basically October through May, an LGS2 customer will pay less per kilowatt hour and less per kilowatt than you might as an LGS1 customer. But guess what happens in the summer? Things go up a little bit more. They have time of use aspects that LGS1 customers don't. And why am I harping on this? I'm harping on this because certain customers go between these rate classes in their buildings, right? They may just exceed 300 kilowatts. And if they do that for a couple months, they go up to LGS2. That may benefit the customer depending on their operation because they may use more electricity in the off-peak months and get to pay less for it if they're LGS2. It may hurt certain customers. I can tell you in my experience, an LGS1 customer pays a little bit more per kilowatt hour. If you add everything up and divide it by the kilowatt hours over a year, an LGS1 customer's blended rate is a little bit higher. But that really does depend. That's a very general statement. So it's something you need to really look at. But if you've got a customer that's floating in that 250 to 350 range, you can get a little deeper. You can get a little wonky into that and decide which would be better for them. And then they could potentially tailor their operation to do that, right? So that's a pretty deep energy management strategy, but it's something to think about because if you understand rates, you can take advantage of that. So other similar line items here. So I'm not going to go too deeply through those other than to get to the point of highlighting what's different when you're in a summer month on an LGS2 meter. Now the bill's really long, and this doesn't even include a change in rate. Now you've got different time periods of the day that electricity costs a different amount and demand costs a different amount. And so when we talk about manufacturing, HVAC, even lighting, right? If you're putting advanced controls in some of these systems, you can tailor things to reduce some of the impact of what happens here. Now you can see several line items that get into the thousands. Particularly, what I would highlight is on the top row, your on-peak consumption, $6,000 here. Your on-peak demand, again, that's a 15-minute window, okay? So in 15 minutes, they averaged 394 kW. Because of that experience, they paid $5,000 that month, okay? So on peak is 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. between June 1 and September 30. So when you're thinking about your operations, and again, I've experienced this and I've seen it, companies, businesses, operations will tailor their operations around that. You might not want to start a major motor in that period of time. You might want to start it at 12:30, right? So you don't get that spike hit impacting your 15-minute window. Anybody else with experience in working around these hours? Okay, good. So that's helpful. Mid-peak is 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. on those days between June 1 and September 30. There's also a demand charge there. Now notice that it's $12.80 in on-peak, and in mid-peak it's $2.65. Off-peak, I don't even think there is a demand charge in off-peak, right? So off-peak being overnight hours and things like that. So talk about electric vehicles, and there's dedicated rates for electric vehicles that incentivize you to charge your car overnight, right? This type of rate incentivizes you to do other things overnight. So if you're thinking about providing space cooling, I don't know, this town we do conventions, right? When am I going to put the most cooling into that convention space to get it ready for the morning? I'm going to get it all done before 10 o'clock, right? I'm still going to need to cool it when people are in there, but I'm going to be going down as cool as I can to pre-cool that space, so I'm loading up my units. Other things that I would do with this, I would use lighting controls. This is where advanced lighting controls can come into play. You don't have to dim your lights more than 20, 30% to save a good bit of money if you have quite a bit of lights. And you don't have to do that every day, right? But if you're monitoring your on-peak demand and you're starting to cross a threshold where today I'm about to set that new peak, I'm going to dim my lights down a little bit, right? I'm going to take them down to maybe 70%, make sure I hit my minimum code requirements, but I might make it a little dimmer for those hours, right? So you can kind of do your own demand management in that respect. That requires some instrumentation. It requires, true energy management, as I would say. You got to kind of watch that every day because it only takes one day out of the 30 to set that peak. And finally, I would say here as well, there's still a facility charge that's also per kW. So when you start to add up the things that are based on demand, it can be pretty significant. And so, our program is all about achieving energy efficiency savings, but what happens when you put in modern technologies, advanced controls, is it impacts demand as well. So when you're thinking of that as a contractor, it helps to understand their bill, their rate, things like that. Any questions on that before I move on? Okay. One last piece on information that you can find. Everybody has access to my account. So any customer can go in here and look at their history, what they've been doing, pull past bills. This is how, if you're working with them, you can talk to them about this. Pretty easy. This is actually pulled from my house, so I hope I didn't put any personal identifiable information. I happen to have solar on my roof, and so that's why the graph looks wonky over here, because the green is actually when I sold back to the grid, and the blue is when I purchased from the grid on that day. So I had a net sale so a cloudy day, I'm buying in the blue, and sunny day, I'm selling back in that green. So within that page, if I click view usage, I can go to any number of graphs. I can look at the last week, I can look at the last month, and I can actually download pretty detailed information. So this download smart meter usage tab allows you to pull that 15-minute data. So every 15 minutes, they get a signal from your meter. And you can actually go in there and pull 2 years worth of that data up to 2 days prior to today. And again, that's extra effort, right? Might I do that for a project in a room like this? Probably not. If I'm doing a large facility and I'm working with a customer, if they're not doing this and I want to really get into when are you hitting your peak demand, right? Because that's what you're going to get out of that. You're going to get a load curve for the day for 2 years if you want to. You put in your dates, you put in your email, you put submit, and it'll actually populate here. It takes a little bit of time for it to pull that data, and then it'll email you when the report is ready. So again, energy people, we use this all the time. We actually use this to help on large projects when we're working through this program to help verify some of the things that are happening when customers are doing large projects. But we also encourage, there's a certain class of large contractors, for example, those that are doing retro commissioning, that this information is critical for them to be able to demonstrate that what they're doing to control that building is actually reducing that load over time. They could use that to compare to the weather outside. They could use that to compare to their manufacturing operation, things like that. So that's my wonk. The question is, can that data be pulled automatically? Can it go to Portfolio Manager? The answer is, in theory, yes. Particularly larger customers of NV Energy that are major accounts, they do have the ability to sometimes get that connected. As a common citizen, no, I cannot do this for my own electricity. Excuse me. But there are ways so again, for larger customers, they can work with their major account executive at NV Energy. And so we do have examples where that 15-minute data is sent directly to a contractor with the authorization of the customer. That would be, it's a good question. If that's above LG1, it depends on the annual consumption more so than the demand. Yeah, so I would encourage a customer who, if they're not a managed account, they can also reach out to the business customer service line. I believe it's called customer success, if I'm not mistaken. And I can follow up with you with that question as well.
And see the certification live.
Okay. Sounds like a business opportunity to take data and integrate it into those systems, right? For certain customers. Yeah. Okay. I've got a couple things left to talk about today. A few things about energy efficiency and trends that are happening here and nationally that I wanted to talk about. Open to feedback on this. The first thing I wanted to say, and had a couple conversations with George over here about the thought process of integrating energy efficiency into kind of any project, right? I gave you the example of the amount of road construction that's happening, and I guarantee you that most of those people first thought on their mind was not to replace the lights while they were doing it. But the idea that you're bundling in a choice to make, have a 15, 30-minute conversation and enhance the scope of a project by a small percentage to also save electricity. Replacing outdated equipment. I gave you the example of the manufacturing customer, but classic in this town, it's HVAC units, right? And our incentive is kind of to incentivize someone to buy a better unit than the new unit that they would consider. But those benefits of a new HVAC unit go far beyond our incentive, right? So everything that we've already talked about. And so when you're looking at building out shelf space, or you're looking at a major renovation, or you're looking at replacing a unit, it's just the idea that that's energy efficiency. It's in your muscle memory. And if you're meeting with a customer, you're asking them if they're doing any other types of projects where you might be able to consider that type of energy efficient mechanism. Lighting policy and advanced lighting controls. Just briefly to touch on this, when you're meeting with the CFO, meeting with some of your directors in your facilities, would you agree that the general understanding is that lighting is easy, but the reality is that it's not, right? So it takes quite a long time to build a large lighting project and really make it be everything that fits the space, right? The example I would give is, classrooms, right? We could do a classroom and easily replace the tube with an LED tube using a custodian. But that doesn't do anything for the students, it doesn't do anything for the teacher, doesn't add any controls, doesn't replace the lens, doesn't do any, electrical upgrade. And so, you start to think about all those choices, doesn't give them the ability to reduce demand, right? We just kind of talked about that. So, when you're thinking about lighting, it's not easy. And, asking questions and being prepared to work with a customer, or as a customer prepared to work with kind of your customer, right? Your users, what is it that they need? What's the best choice for them? It's not easy. Something else that's not easy is states have started to transition from the ability for distributors to sell fluorescent lights holistically. I'm speaking to experts in this room, so you already know that. There's about 7 states who've already done that. It is not currently in Nevada. It wouldn't surprise me if it does come in the next 1 or 2 rounds of the legislative session. It just kind of depends on priorities in the state. California has done it, and so there's a little bit of a runway there, but it's not long. And as a person who worked in facilities, it's hard to imagine that you couldn't go out and buy a fluorescent tube. So there will be a big discussion about that if it ever decides to come to Nevada for those doing maintenance and operations. Yes, Eric. Yeah.
First two is ROI, talking about doing something more than they were expecting to do. And we're talking about people costs, like maintenance costs.
that goes down with new technology.
Mhm.
Less put in the environment that's going to require less energy. Take it out.
Yep.
So I think it's a valid point to highlight as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Yeah. And, if it wasn't heard online, just to kind of piggyback on what Eric added, there's some hidden costs when you think about it, any project, or some hidden benefits potentially. For example, those kind of interrelational aspects of, again, lighting project reduces the heat load, right? Particularly certain lighting projects, in addition to reducing the maintenance cost to work on those things. So a couple other things I want to talk about. Consumptive water use reduction. Everybody familiar with what I'm talking about? So the Southern Nevada Water Authority, towards the end of 2022, implemented passed a resolution to ultimately put a moratorium on new evaporative cooling systems for new developments, which is a gigantic shift in our region here in Southern Nevada. So instead of the large cooling towers that you're seeing on, casino hotels, or even schools, or manufacturing facilities, or swamp coolers that you're seeing on large warehouses, those things, if they don't have their building permit by now, they're not going to be able to be built that way. And so, again, it presents an opportunity. It requires a little creativity. How are you going to cool large spaces cost effectively without the ability to evaporate water? Evaporation works really well out here because it's so dry. So electricity use will go up because you're needing to use air to provide, to reject your heat to, and there are many months of the year, as we talked about, where that is hard to do. So the choices that you're having to make on new construction are, again, to deal with, a design day used to be maybe 110 degrees and 80% humidity. So your design day now is probably 120 degrees and 80%, 90% humidity. So you're having to upsize equipment to handle that reality, in addition to being fully electric in terms of cooling. So you're talking about physically bigger equipment, cooling coils, bigger motors, bigger fans, real estate, things like that. It can be done. We have lots of facilities that are air cooled, and we'll talk about heat pumps in a minute, as they are definitely one of the solutions that's going to be absolutely necessary to do that. But electricity goes up, right, when we make that choice. So we can still incentivize that project because there are codes for using air-cooled equipment. So as we're making good choices on that air-cooled equipment, we're getting more efficient air-cooled equipment. We can still incentivize that project on new construction. Additionally, for retrofit projects, if your cooling tower is failing, right, or your swamp coolers are failing, the water authority has some really excellent, or even if you just want to replace them, right? There's a side benefit to getting rid of a cooling tower, by the way. You don't have to deal with water treatment. You don't have to deal with scale. You don't have to deal with any of that maintenance. But additionally, the Southern Nevada Water Authority does have some really great incentives for implementing water efficiency projects. So I don't have that whole table here, but it is per ton or per gallon, depending on the mechanism that you look at. So I participated in dozens of cooling tower retrofits that just made them more efficient, that can be incentivized, as well as the full-on replacement of a cooling tower, a water-cooled system with an air-cooled chiller, right? So it can be done. You need the real estate, and you need the power. So those are things you need to consider. I talked about heat pumps, and there's an endless amount of heat pumps. So I just put a couple of examples here. And this is applicable, I would, for really the whole state. I've heard of varying degrees of success in ground source heat pumps to provide a heat sink here in Southern Nevada. Definitely more advantageous, in my opinion, in climates that need more cooling or more heating, sorry. But nevertheless, that's an opportunity to drive a water source heat pump using the ground. Air source heat pumps, again, the word heat pump is everywhere, that you can put a heat pump on just about anything, water heater. we look at these things and I don't think any of us really considered them a heat pump, but that's what they are, right? A window air conditioner it's just a heat pump. It's just, doesn't use water, doesn't use gas. It's just exhausting the heat. So when you're building or fitting out small spaces, the split systems are super targeted, fully electric. You don't have to run gas to them, right? That could be a benefit depending on where they are in the space as well. So, and they don't use water. Alternative refrigerants. This is something I wanted to highlight. I would say this is emerging. Okay, this is something that's a little bit down the pike, more on a federal or a global scale, but it is going to be very important. It's particularly important for grocery stores, whether you are in that world or not. Refrigerant is actually, various refrigerants are about the worst greenhouse gases that we have. And so those leaks are just tremendously critical to avoid. And so there's quite a mission to just rid ourselves of those refrigerants to begin with. Unfortunately, they're also the most efficient refrigerants in most cases. So there's a lot of research being done. There's a lot of projects being executed to move to things like CO2. There's a lot of industries already used ammonia, right? So ammonia is usually used to get real cold, right? Make ice, big freezers that are warehouse style freezers, things like that. But ammonia systems can be used, alongside heat exchangers to cool just about anything. So that's more of a new design if you're not working with it now. And it's also toxic, so you have to manage it well. It is dangerous. So it requires a whole different safety protocol and a level of access. So there's a lot of trade-offs with refrigerant. And so it's
close.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, just don't have a ton of experience, but I've been around it enough to know. And there's also propane refrigerant being used. A lot of the new standalone cases that you might see at like a Starbucks are starting to run on propane refrigerants. Again, there's a minor, I would say relatively minor. It's propane, so you're going to think about it twice in terms of flammability. But it is more beneficial. So the general trend to use what they call low GWP, global warming potential refrigerants, it's going to pick up. And so I put a little reference here, Energy Star Product Finder. You could find products on there that were more efficient and are using these types of refrigerants. There's over 1,200 from refrigerators all the way up to, large refrigeration equipment. And, start moving towards that. Even things like R134A, which is probably the absolute most common that I've seen around here, not going away anytime soon, but there's going to become a point in the next couple of years where you're not going to be able to buy it in a new piece of equipment. And so it will be on the market. You'll be able to refill things that have leaks and whatnot, but the cost of that will just continue to go up like it has for some of these other refrigerants like R22 and things like that. So when you're thinking about replacing equipment, you're future-proofing it for the environment, but you're from the temperature-wise, you're designing, but you're also future-proofing it from something that may come along and be a 20-year experience trying to purchase R134A. You might want to think twice about that. And then obviously you want to try to make an energy efficient choice there. Now I'm going to get into and do a time check. Any questions on those? I'm going to move into how to work within our program and give you some context on that. So we'll do this relatively quickly. I think most of you know what we offer in business energy services in terms of incentives. You heard a little bit about that today as we walk through this. We offer application support if you're participating in our program. We do education and trainings like this. We have opportunities for small businesses, nonprofits, and then we have an instant discount program. We'll talk about that. So we already talked about the benefits of energy efficiency, but reduced expenses, cash savings. To again, piggyback on what Eric said, we talk about comfort. These things come with some of these modern systems. An example of the areas that we look at, but our program's really great in the scope of energy programs because anything that you do that can save energy, we can work as a custom project. So it's not really, I wouldn't say there's too much of a limit there. I already talked about the process that we go through. We're constantly meeting with contractors and customers to understand what's going on in the market. But when you're ready to do a project, we look for a pre-application and estimation of the savings and what's going to be the scope. And then we work with you throughout that process. We'll check in with you during that 90-day clock. We'll give you an extension if you need one. Projects take long. Deliveries get delayed. Workers are hard to find. We can easily extend a project. When there's a final application, we look to do a final inspection in some cases, and then we pay out the project. So I already talked about a lot of this, just highlighting a few things that we've seen. Prescriptive incentives are available. I'll show you the table. It's also in your folder for lighting, commercial kitchens, cooling, and miscellaneous. And then we can do a custom project for pretty much anything we can verifiably save kilowatt hours. And then I want to highlight that we also have a bonus right now. So for retrofit projects that happen in the next several months before the end of June, we'll add 20% to the incentive that we would have calculated otherwise. So whatever that works out to be, we'll add 20% onto that. And those projects need to be completed and submitted by the end of June. So we did a similar thing to this last year. There is a cap on it. 15 million kilowatt hours in northern Nevada region and 30 million kilowatt hours here in the south. So we want to get those things moving and executed as quickly as we can. We also have a contractor network bonus. We had about 7 contractors. Oh, sorry, did you have a question? These are for businesses that perform retrofit work. So, but we also have a contractor network bonus. So a little extra kicker, right? So if you're a contractor that's delivering, and this is cumulative kilowatt hours on retrofit projects. We had, I think, 7 contractors receive a network bonus from 2023. A couple were over 2.5 million, and I think we had one over the 5 million. So a little extra something to, sweeten the pot for win our program. Again, don't put these charts up here other than to demonstrate the amount of opportunity there is for different savings in buildings and in technologies. Lighting, commercial kitchen, transformers and UPSs. We didn't really talk about that today, right? But you're looking at things that are consuming electricity, motors, variable frequency drives. I didn't mention air compressor systems, but this is another area where we see a lot of program participation. You look at a retrofit on those systems, it usually involves a pretty good leak check. Fundamentally, helps you save electricity, but also you're retrofitting equipment or you're adding controls that allow it to run more efficiently. New construction. Again, I talked about this a little bit. The idea is that we're building buildings that are exceeding energy code by more than 5%, and then they become eligible for our program for every kilowatt hour that beats IECC 2018. Yes, sir. As far as I'm aware, no one has adopted 2021 yet in Nevada. Okay. I might check in with you after that to see who's adopted 2021, but our program right now as it sits is 2018, but we would probably change that, and I don't know that would change this year. It really is going to be on the project kind of when it went through the process, if that makes sense. So a lot of the projects that we would incentivize on new construction this year are already going, submitted, and processed and things like that. So.
I said, no. It was issued under 18, so 18 is going to stay.
Yeah, it'll be a different discussion when it's the 2021 code because the energy requirements of that are very different, and they will require you to do things that 2018 does not. So so that's new construction, and there's kind of 2 ways to get new construction incentives. the performance-based whole building. So typically we're seeing this on bigger facilities where there's an energy model being created. And then we look at that model as it would, as the building would perform at kind of baseline IECC. And then how does the building actually perform based on what's being installed and the way things are being controlled. And then we can incentivize on that delta so long as it exceeds 5%. Prescriptive path is more applicable, very similar thought process to retrofit, right? So you're making good choices on lighting and your comm check says you are this much below IECC 2018 for HVAC, for lighting, for other systems. We have incentives, based on reductions in that as well. For those projects, we need architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing drawings, spec sheets, things like that when the project is completed to verify what was done. And again, similar chart for new construction. Quite a bit of options in commercial kitchens, but also lighting in exterior, interior, and of course, air-cooled, water-cooled, all types of HVAC units. Finally, I want to talk about instant discounts. This is a program that we've had for a number of years now. We are expanding it this year to include wall packs, exterior lighting fixtures of wall packs and pole lights. We're about a week too early for me to tell you what those incentive rates are going to be. There will be several different rates for each one of these based on wattage, actually lumens. And so, this program is point of sale discount, no application, so long as that customer is eligible as a customer of NV Energy. They receive the discount at the point of sale from the distributors. And so we find that this is heavily used, particularly with these types of fixtures, right? So 4 foot, 2 foot, and then your tubes and your choppers. So one big change on this program that we have in 2024 is that we will accept these products in our retrofit program or our midstream program. So prior years, we would have asked you to go through the instant discount program to do a project with these light fixtures. We would have really kind of not encouraged you to do a retrofit application. But this year we're doing it either or, right? So you can't double dip, but you can do either or. And there's several use cases where the energy savings and the ultimate incentive will end up better for the customer if they go through the retrofit program. If the lights are 24/7, that's a fundamental example that I would give you to say why you would want to do that. So one of the big benefits to this is obviously your upfront investment on the project is lower, right? On the incentive program, you're going to get that back after you've completed the project. Here, you're cutting the cost out of the project right at the front. So see this done a little bit more with in-house installs. And here's a list of our instant discount distributors. Move through that, but they will be in the slides afterwards. And then finally, our instant discount website, generally speaking, everything I've talked about is at nvenergy.com/BES, Business Energy Services, and very easy to link to our different websites. But our instant discount website has a list of the distributors with their contact information, as well as details on the program. Last but not least, I've already talked about retro commissioning a few times. We're going to have a little bit more of a deep dive on retro commissioning in March, on our March event, which will be in the same place. And kind of talk about how that program has been successful for certain customers and get a little deeper into that. So that'll be here in Las Vegas on March 26th and in Reno on March 27th, both at 11:30. And with that, I will thank you. Any other questions here? Yes, sir. So asking the NV Energy guy how the NV Energy buildings can save electricity. Yeah. Let me happily take that to the facility side of NV Energy for you. How about that? Thank you. Yes, sir. That's actually, the answer was, look at who owns the property. And actually, it's an astute answer because NV Energy, I believe, does not own all of their properties. So, yes. They do. But it's an interesting concept that it's happening throughout the valley that, you know, some of us rent, some of us lease, some of us are not in charge of those decisions, but we pay the bill. So actually a very interesting thought process. I'm glad you added that to the meeting. Thank you. Anybody else? Question? All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time. Thanks for coming. See you next time. Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for coming. Sat in the front, so you got to look at my mug the whole time. Huh? Good. Yeah, that one will be, you know, if you're into that, it'll be good. So, yeah. Oh, thanks for coming. Nice to meet you guys. Yes, you can just leave it there. We'll clean it all up. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So for cooling towers, you guys just replaced them?
So at CCSD, we did two different things. If we were going to keep the tower, like if it was 10 years old and just needed a refurb, we would replace the drift. Any, you know, repairs on pipes, outside, exterior, and that could be incentivized by the water authority. So if you put a drift eliminator in there, like a better drift, and so we did that on those towers